Imagine stepping into a seemingly empty field and watch his army disappear in screams. You didn't even see the enemy, but he has already lost. Rome did not expect war to come. She creates war before the first cry is heard. Every stone, every bush, every mud puddle, it was a death trap. They were not arrows, they were not swords. They were disguised holes, poisonous stakes, invisible nets. And the scariest thing, you wouldn't even have time to react. Now yes, continue with, even before the sword was wielded, Rome's enemy was already losing. Before the sword was even wielded, Rome's enemy was already losing. Buried, disguised, precisely positioned traps, victory began in the soil, not in the blood. The Romans won by shaping the terrain, not reacting to chaos. Intelligence was his most lethal weapon. Roman engineers didn't just build bridges and roads, they drew death. Every inch of ground could hide a nightmare. His creations were silent, cold, effective. They were the warning that, for Rome, every stone was part of the battlefield. Iron or wooden spikes buried in invisible lines. The function of the stimula was simple: to hurt, to disorganize, to deter. One false step and the leg was crossed. The enemy screamed, fell, and the whole advance turned to panic. The first line of defense was already destroying morale. Julius Caesar used the stimula as dark poetry in Lilia. He nailed the field with stakes, set up a murderous soil. Every meter conquered was paid for with torn flesh. The fear of moving forward was greater than the pain of retreating. Caesar made the ground fight for him, flower-shaped pits, a deadly irony. Camouflaged with leaves, full of poisoned cuttings, the enemy would fall in and be pierced, bleeding silently. Lilia didn't just kill, she hid death, made it sudden, unpredictable. The next step could be the last. In Scotland and England, the walls of Hadrian and Antoninus were not just stone, they were bait. The Lilia protected them like thorns in a flower. Anyone who dared to get close was swallowed by the ground. The Roman barriers did not end at the top, they started underground. A deep trench, tortuous as a nightmare, sharp branches on the bottom. When the enemy fell there was no turning back, legs trapped, deep cuts. The sip did not only block the advance, they broke the will to fight. The army was passing, and it fell apart there. The hidden line that Caesar drew in Lilia, Caesar did not rely only on men. He made the land a living wall. Lilia, sip, and stimula formed layers. The defense was invisible but lethal. The enemy saw open field and fell into hell. Rome killed even before showing its face. Trenches with muddy water. They seemed natural, but they were calculated traps. Siege engines bogged down, soldiers drowned. The mud pulled down. The crossing turned into a liquid grave. The Romans used nature itself as a shield, the water that gave life. Now he did. If an enemy tried to escape, he would have to go through the pits. But it couldn't. The water was cold, heavy, and the ground sank under the weight. The desperate tried to swim and sank in armor. It was better to die fighting than to flee by that road, intertwined branches, invisible to the hurried eye. All it took was one touch, and everything closed. Soldiers fell, horses were trapped. The deer was like a web. The battlefield became a living trap. The enemy thought he was advancing, but he was already a prisoner. The dread came before the impact. Deer did not kill with stakes. They killed with surprise. The terror of the unexpected froze his feet. The advance turned into confusion. It was chaos in silence. The field seemed calm until he devoured his first scream. 3 sharp points, cold as poison, scattered like seeds on the ground. The horses galloped, and they fell screaming. Chariots broke down. Dismounted troops became easy prey. Mobility, the greatest weapon of many armies, was destroyed with a piece smaller than a fist. At the Battle of Carrhae, the Romans used strips masterfully. Before the first engagement, the Parthians were already disorganized. No horses, no momentum, no chance. The war has lost its rhythm, and when everything stopped, Rome has advanced. Slow, imminent, deadly. The ground seemed firm, but it wasn't. Layers of leaves hid the void. One false step and the soldier disappeared. It was like being swallowed up. Broken bones, lost weapons. Nobody warned us. It was a war field that chewed up before the confrontation. At the Battle of Lugdunum, Albinus made the Romans taste their own poison. It created hidden pits. Severus's soldiers marched confidently and disappeared to the ground. The strategy was as cruel as it was effective. Rome learned that even its tricks could be copied and hurt. Centuries later, the Romans fell again. The Sassanids dug trenches, disguised ditches. Belisarius marched towards disaster. The ground opened. Men were screaming, "Glory has become a trap." Rome fell where it thought it dominated. The land was an enemy, not an ally. More than hurting bodies, Rome hurt minds. The traps spread rumors. The enemy was advancing in fear. Every sound was suspicious, each step a doubt. It was the invisible terror that stopped armies even before the first engagement. Rome struggled with the mind. The traps were not isolated. They were part of a whole, a minefield of strategy. Each layer protected the other. The enemies fell in sequence. The wall was not in the walls. It was on the ground. And Rome knew how to hide it perfectly. Each Roman trap told a story of strategy, of pain, of cruel genius. Today, these creations still scare us because they show that true strength is not in the sword, but in the mind that knows where to bury it. Rome did not win by force alone. He won by sight. Rome didn't need to shout to win, she whispered. In the silence of the ground, in the shadows of the trenches, in the branches arranged with surgical precision, each trap wasn't just a defense. It was a message, a warning that war for the Romans began before the sword was drawn. It began with calculation, with coldness, with the ability to transform one's own ground into an ally. These traps were more than tools of war. They were reflections of a ruthless mentality, that of anticipating, surprising, and dominating without having to expose oneself. Roma shaped the field before shaping the victory. He beat the enemy before he even knew he was losing. And perhaps, in the end, the greatest lesson these contraptions of death leave us is not about war, but about vision, about preparation, about intelligence. Because who waits for the attack? To react is already losing, but who shapes the terrain before the battle? He never enters it alone. If this story made you feel something different, if at some point you realized that Rome was not just strength, but strategic vision, then I ask you for something sincere. Return, not me, but to the knowledge that touched you, to the experience that transformed you. Leave your like now. This simple gesture makes this message reach other people who, like you, also deserve to see history with new eyes. And if you want to continue that journey in exploring buried secrets, forgotten tactics, and lessons that still echo centuries later, subscribe to the channel, because here, with each video, you not only learn, you transform.